1. And there was the phone box, thought Abigail as they walked swiftly down Fairham Street, towards the city walls and, beyond, the bus station. There, just on the bench. He wasn't allowed to go into the fountains, she wasn't allowed over Rossville Street. Outside the phone box, that was where it had all begun, 7 months ago. Or was it longer? Her life back in Edgeford so often felt as if someone else had lived it. James squeezed her hand and smiled at her. It's all going to be all right. My dad says he'll meet us off the train, at Bromley. Abby realized she had shivered. She turned and smiled back at James. Were they really leaving this place? Derry, London Derry? A war zone on British soil. Or, was it Irish soil? According to the peace accord, it was its own soil, neither British nor Irish exclusively, and yet, both. She had dreamed of leaving it for so long. Would they make it to Belfast, and the ferry to Liverpool? Would they even survive getting to Foyle Street? James clutched her hand tighter, then pulled Abigail close to him. She wondered if he even remembered that just behind them was the first time he had taken her hands in this tempestuous city. London Derry. With a silent London, James had said. It was one of the first things Abigail remembered about him, when her life in the Midlands had closed behind her, like a river re-emerging after circumnavigating a small island in its center. She had been the island, her life had moved past her, friends, family. Especially family. Her mother had even neglected to tell her about her uncle's funeral. Abby had held onto the receiver for goodness knew how long, as her mother made her excuses, and hung up. She had sat on the bench, back there. All that her mother had told her, almost as an afterthought. After Abby had begged her aunt for 50 pence for the call? How could it be that her mother had forgotten to tell her? Her beloved uncle. And now he was gone, cremated. Come on, James murmured, as they got to St. Colum's Cathedral. 10 minutes until the bus leaves. He took her hand and they both began to run down Bishopsgate, past the city walls and down towards the Foyle. They did not hear the scrape of stone on concrete. 88,888,888. Thoughts about going to school had been filling her minutes since the evening of New Year's Day. Mum was out round at her uncle's again, with her little sister in tow. Her dad had just gone off to work. 2 more terms, and that would be it. End of year 11, on to something new. A-levels, most likely, then university. Live her own life. Get out of Edgeford, a place with no ambition, the most boring place in the world. So it was a shock to Abigail to find out that her mother had decided that she was to finish her 2 terms not at her own school, with the teachers she knew and the friends she hung about with, but in a school in some back end of nowhere with Mum's cousin's family. Apparently, it had already been arranged. And that's it? Abby had raged. There's nothing I can say to undo this? It's your temper, like this, that causes your mother so much aggravation, her father had then put in. Her mother's words in his mouth, Abigail thought, bitterly. The way you've spoken to her just now, she's nursing your Uncle David, as well as your sister. But I'm hardly ever here for you to bother about. Abigail had said, storming around the kitchen. My friends. It's you going God knows where and doing God knows what that's caused me to do this. Her mother shot back, bluntly. I mean, where were you last night? New Year's Eve, for God's sake? Because you got home at 7:30 this morning, and Mrs. Hardy said you weren't at their house, like you said. So, where exactly were you? Her father had bothered to chip into the conversation, so no one could say he never tried. Down at the Skelly, Abby's mind recalled, for about the 100th time as she looked out at the ferry window as it plunged and dived between grayish waves on its journey across the Irish Sea. The Skelly, a piece of waste ground, once mining infrastructure now long left to grow wild at the back of the park in Edgeford. It was the place where all teenagers hung out, sooner or later, there on the Aquam, on a Wednesday night. Someone's dad had thought to rent out the local Aquarius ballroom once a week for the town's place to be, the under-18s disco. No alcohol, no cigarettes. Like hell. But they were too old for that, too cool. The red wine dance was just too staid for them when they could be listening to Pearl Jam, Manic Street Preachers or Nirvana over the fields on Thames Ghetto Blaster 200 yards away, until the batteries ran out and they had to have a whip round and go to the shops for more, talking and laughing and drinking White Lightning out of the bottle and mourning the death of River Phoenix and Kurt Cobain. Quoting verbatim the lines of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Wayne's World or The Breakfast Club. Emma, her best friend in the world, had smiled as Abby managed to squeeze in next to their other friend, Tammy's brother's best friend, Dan, who had brought his electric guitar down to the Skelly, to play Heart-Shaped Box Dolly, just for them, and other edgy songs, as edgy as you could get in an ex-mining town in the Midlands. And they had hung, and enjoyed everyone else's cheers and fireworks, before going to Tammy's brother's lockup at about 1 a.m., where their band rehearsed, to stay out of the cold, and had meaningful, half-drunk philosophical discussions eating pot noodles with water boiled in a kettle over John's car engine until Stu decided it was. Now it was light, safe enough to drive everyone home in his Ford Fiesta. It wouldn't have mattered if her parents understood any of this. Abby was sure her feelings or opinions about anything mattered to them anymore. Her friends were what was keeping her going, away from the Rose and B arguments about alcohol in her school bag to calls about missing work from her teachers and a condom her mother had found in her pencil case, pretty much accusing her of being a prostitute. Abby had been hiding it for Emma. Perhaps if her mother bothered to ask her about how she felt about anything, or offered her any insight into the future beyond exams, she wouldn't rely on her friends, who were just there for her, like she was for them. Like when Emma had come round to see her the morning of her 16th birthday and dragged her off to town on the pretext of buying her a gift, but instead confessed she had done it with Robbie, and didn't know what to do. "I had the thing," she confessed. "But he didn't want to use it." Abby had taken her hand. She knew what to do, and she had stuck in the 50 pence into the slot of the phone box at the top end of Market Street, and had called Emma's doctor and spoke to the receptionist about getting the morning after pill for her, reassuring the usual together friend of hers that she was still entitled to it even though it was a Saturday, and even if they couldn't get it today it would still work even if they bunked off on Monday as it was within 72 hours, and that her parents would never find out because the doctor had to keep it confidential. How was it ever going to be the same now that she was going to a place that could only be described as a nightmare and whose town and city names Abby only knew? Newry, Enniskillen, Belfast, Bangor, Armagh, London, Derry. Through terrorist reports. "We're nearly there," she heard the voice of a woman say. "Belfast." Abby turned, watching the young woman with a boy and a girl smile happily at them before handing them rucksacks, urging them to tidy up their colourings, toys and sweets. "And the people of Northern Ireland. No. I say, not 1 inch." Abby's mind imitated, in the accent everyone linked to interviewees when they were describing a bomb going off somewhere, as around her, other passengers were making movements linked to their imminent disembarkation. And in other news, her inner voice continued, mockingly in the accent, as a hubbub of expectation rose steadily. "A car bomb exploded in the centre of Edgeford this afternoon, causing thousands of pounds worth of improvements. No one has yet owned up to this horrific attack of civic altruism, but Midlands Today has reason to believe the plant was planted by the Women's Institute." An announcement, which was distorted by the PA system, was unintelligible, so Abby watched the rest of the ferry passengers as they made their way towards the back of the ferry, took up her suitcase, and followed.